Yeah, it's not. Prompts aren't like, they're actually interesting and they're like.
Hey, good afternoon. Good. Great. Thanks everybody for joining us for the Crack the Case case interviewing workshop that's going to be presented today by Professor Mihir Mankad. As some of you may know, he is a professor here at Fletcher teaching the arts of communication. And we'll be teaching 2 sessions this semester. Professor Mankad comes from a background of consulting, having previously consulted at McKinsey in Mumbai and at Bain in San Francisco, has had a long and storied broadcasting career, and has delivered this workshop in the past, last year, very well attended, and also is one of our case interviewing workshop coaches here. So for consulting interviews and for other interviews that require the case reviewing method, he's proven to be invaluable. So please help me in welcoming Professor Mankad.
Thank you, Christy. It's a real pleasure to do this again. We did this workshop exactly 1 year ago on October 3rd, 2013 for the first time. We did it in ASEAN, and a slightly different dynamic. I see the room is focused more on the back there. Are you guys hoping for an escape route if you're bored or if you need to leave earlier? Okay, so at least one of you is. Great, so let's see, we've slotted in 2 hours for this, but I'm hoping that we can get through the crux of what I want to go through today in about 90 minutes. Okay. I will stay for the entire 2 hours, so the rest of the half hour that we might spare, we can have a kind of a smaller discussion if you need. Management consulting is basically one of the most sought after professions after graduate school, after professional schools. It's virtually open to everyone, and there are some conceptions of it that we might have. I'm trying to be very focused on this case to just give you as much of the case study material, but I want to cover 2 other things in kind of short bursts today. One is to just answer any questions or clarify a few things about the profession itself. And 2 is to just touch on very briefly the fit interview part. The career service office here is very well equipped to work and coach with you when you do get an interview to actually have these sessions on the fit interview. But I want to share with you just in 5 minutes an actual strategy session that we had in one of the consulting firms that I worked with, where we talked about the 5 most common fit questions. It's going to be for 5 minutes. I'm going to use the rest of the time to go through some case studies. I want to go through 3 case studies in detail today. Okay. My recommendation is that you do about 50 case studies between yourselves before your interview. Now, this sounds like a lot of time, but you are going to be competing against MBAs who eat, drink, and sleep this material. The case study workshop, the case study method at business school is oriented towards thinking of each business situation as a case. And while the education here might be slightly different, you have that bar to compete against the same people. Okay. Last year, in addition to this workshop, I also had the pleasure of working with about 25 students who had case study interviews coming up. And a couple of them ended up with top-tier strategy firms, and I have seen their effort. And let me tell you, there is no shortcut to that success. There's a lot of things going on right now in school, and you can try to approach consulting in a very casual, relaxed manner, where, let me see what this is about. If it's a fit, I'll get in. But even to get in, you need to put in that effort. So no matter how smart you are, no matter how much business you know already, keep in mind that this is a commitment. If you really want to get the job, you need to put in those 50 to 100 hours of practice before you get into those interviews. I feel this is also a skill that can be practiced and learned. It is supposed to test your intellectual horsepower, your ability to think on the spot, but it's something that after you do your 20th case, your 25th case, or your 40th case, it is something that will come to you in a much more relaxed manner. And that's the secret to being successful here, that some of it is your knowledge, your frameworks, how you solve a problem, but some of it is also your delivery, how relaxed you are, and how much you enjoy the process of going through these interviews. Okay? So here's the agenda for today. to spend about 5 minutes on the introduction, which I've done already, 5 minutes on case interview tips, and then about an hour or so on the case interviews itself. Now C206 is an easier room for participation than ASEAN Auditorium, and I'm really hoping that we can make this as interactive as it can be for a group of 50 students. Okay. I may cold call in a very relaxed manner, not in something that's solving the case by itself. So let's just try and make it as interactive as possible. Also, if you feel that there's something that you need to ask, even in the middle of the case that you need to clarify, feel free to just raise your hands. Okay. Okay. Now, I think this is a very important part of my philosophy on approaching any public speaking environment. And it's a big part of the class. I have some of my students who can testify to this too. Is that part of your goal as you go through interviews or through public speaking is to try and enjoy that process. Now that's much easier said than done, but the way you can get closer and closer to that is through practice. All good public speakers, all good interviewers go through this process where they start enjoying an increasing percentage of that speech or that interview. I remember when I had my final round BCG interview in San Francisco, I actually did a summer at BCG San Francisco also, so I've done a tour of all 3 strategy consulting firms. And it just, I flew into San Francisco from business school, and on that day, I felt very happy to be there at that moment. And I was kind of getting to this final round, I was the only one from my business school who was there. And it just, somehow there was a mindset that came to me that, at the end of the day now, I have done over 100 cases. And finally, I've been a little lucky to get in this position. And let me just enjoy the opportunity of meeting these individuals, knowing that the probability of still getting that summer offer was less than 20% for the number that flew in. And this is something that my interviewers said in the feedback back to me. They said, look, it's just hard to choose. We had 3 people from Stanford, 3 from Harvard, a couple from Kennedy School, so forth. And at the end of the day, we found you to have a very relaxed attitude. And that struck with me for over a decade now. Okay. So healthy mindset, if you actually take a look at the numbers, there's a lot of people that apply. There are a few people who actually get these jobs for the summer, but then there's another opportunity full-time. So the best thing that you can do to this process, with this process, is say, look, this is interesting. Case study interviewing, how to solve different business problems. Let me approach this with a mindset, this is something I want to learn, and something that I want to take with a very healthy perspective. I may or may not get the job at the beginning. There will be some dings. Everyone's got some dings, but let me just approach this in as healthy a manner as possible. Let me control the controllables. This is very important. Let me control the things that I can control. If I've gone through an interview and I've not gotten that offer or not gotten the opportunity to move ahead, can I take that extra time to write an email to my interviewer saying, if you would have some time to give me some feedback, I would really appreciate it. Can you do that? Can you draw from every bit of stimulation and feedback that you get to push your own needle in this area? Have realistic expectations. I mentioned this, staying calm and relaxed during the interview itself. A couple of students that I worked with who worked extremely hard last year, when we were getting to the 2nd or the 3rd time that we were doing this case study, right before the interview, my feedback to them is you're getting to the crux of the problem faster than when we were starting. Okay? Yet there seems to be a bit of a hesitation in your voice, and you have a little bit of this approach that I sense that you want to get done with this well versus enjoy the process of problem solving. I want to get done with this speech well versus I want to enjoy the process of speaking to all these people. Okay? So that's going to be the last year that we have to work. Okay, I do use some GIFs in this presentation. This was actually motivated by the website at Fletcher when this was one of the first workshops I gave last year on what should a park call me. You shouldn't use GIFs in consulting presentations, but it's just there for your entertainment. Okay, what is consulting? Now I don't want to go through the very basics of this, I want to give you a few words, just single words that are associated with consulting. If there's any questions, we can talk about them a bit more. Okay? What is consulting? It's about problem solving, number one. Right? Problem solving. It's an issue. For 3 months, you've been given a complex problem. You need to solve it. That's what is called the value addition component of consulting. In the evaluation that you receive as early consultants, for example, Bain had 3 criteria. One is value addition, second is client, third is team. Okay. Have to be strong on value addition, problem solving. That's what this industry is about. Performance improvement. You are brought in to an external organization to improve something about their performance in short bursts of time. There is a client. Right? Client comes first. You're serving a client, good and bad, right? There are short bursts where you get to do some very high-level work with clients. It's a problem that the client feels inclined to pay a lot of money for, so it's an important problem. However, they are a client, you will deliver something to them, and then it's up to them as to what they do with it. That's sometimes some people a frustrating part of the job, right? It's not your company. It is about project studies, cases. Bain, BCG, McKinsey have different names for this. You are on a project, you are on a case. Sometimes if you develop an expertise early, you could be in that same industry or for repeat cases with that client. But by nature, this is a short-term assignment industry, right? You are part of a team. And Fletcher training is excellent for it. Everything you do is in teams. Right? At the beginning, you will also go through some Myers-Briggs personality tests, and you will figure out what your personality type is on certain teams, but you have to get along and work with people. Frameworks. Now, I will give you several frameworks today. My suggestion to you in the interview is don't say, okay, I'm going to apply Porter's 5 forces to solve this problem. Or I'm going to use the 4 C's, and here's the first C, here's the second C, here's the 7S framework. This is something that you want to keep at the back of your mind. Very rarely, or at the grad school level, for interviews, will you have cases that involve a simple application of something and just going through that. It will typically involve several different components. And you can list your ideas, but don't list the names of the frameworks. Decks. Your world is going to be on PowerPoint for a large portion of the time. Those times when you actually meet with the CEO of a company and change the destiny of an organization will be far and few between. They are worth the wait, they're worth the effort. However, most of your time will be on writing out your storyline in PowerPoint, working with Excel, occasionally with Word. That's the reality of this job as it starts. Deliverables and deadlines, very important. Travel. Now, travel for most consulting firms, that's going to be a part of your life. You know, interestingly, in my career, with 2 years with Bain and also at McKinsey, I was on a lot of local clients. Now, I'm just giving you this perspective because if you are with an office that tends to have a lot of clients in the area, and if you're with a strategy firm, a lot of times you do work out of the office. However, early on in your career, it is fun to travel too. So sometimes when you're traveling, you're at the client side, you feel more connection with your work. And again, there's benefits and costs of both sides, but typically there isn't a lot of travel involved in the consulting career over the long term. And pressure. People don't like to talk about this, but it is to some extent an up or out culture. The good or the news here in this space is that a lot of people realize in 2 years that they've got a great skill set and they want to move on. So I'd say a majority of people choose to move on. And there's definitely some people that are counseled out. But 2 years, sometimes that push may be a good thing in life because you do gain a lot in a couple of years. And you can apply that structure, that mindset, that ability to work with teams and clients to different fields. Consulting in 10 points. Any questions? Yeah, Alan?
Could you please come back to the deck side?
Mhm.
Deck, that now.
A deck is basically a PowerPoint presentation.
Ah, okay.
So So your world is you're going to be best friends with PowerPoint. You know, and it's very interesting sometimes in administrative things too, and if you're a part of like this office culture team, right? You communicate in PowerPoint for things that can be said or can be written or emailed. It's like things are laid out in a storyline in PowerPoint. And it's a nice skill to have too. But Dex will be a big part of your life, PowerPoint, or Prezi at times. Okay, so fit interviews and case interviews. How are we doing on the lighting here? Should we dim the lights here?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, can someone help out at the back who might know about the lighting?
Might be switches. I think they're right there, actually.
That's not bad.
Oh, this one? This back? Okay, top 5 fit questions. I'm going to open this up. What do you think is the first question that consultants want to hear from you? First answer that they want to hear.
What do you bring to the table?
Okay. Now think about those who've gone through consulting. The very first thing that you're asked, yep?
Are you a team player?
Not the first thing, because given if you have made it to the interview, they have called for all those things.
Why consulting?
Yes. Why us? Okay. Why consulting? Why BCG? And you're BCG, but you have to come up with a good answer to this question. First thing, why do you want to do consulting? And your answer, should be personal, but there's not that much innovative points you can put in here. There's the conventional answers around I enjoy problem solving, I enjoy working on important business problems, short amount of time, so forth. I want to be learning at a fast pace. These are general things too, but you have to think about your own answer to this. Why us? Why this form of consulting? Why Simon Kutcher? Why McKinsey? Why Boston? Why Hong Kong? 4 things that you want to think about here. Second part, I gave it away. What's the opposite of why us?
Why you?
Why not us is also the opposite of why us. Why you? Okay. Walk me through your resume. An opportunity for you to highlight the things in your resume that you feel are important for your interviewer to know. Talk about your professional highlights, a project that you worked on that you enjoyed, that you learned a lot from. Why you? What is it that makes you unique in your background for this position? A good office will typically have over 100 applicants for each spot from all good schools. Why you? Strengths and weaknesses. Real strengths, please. Okay, real weaknesses, please. Okay. My weakness is my impatience for my teammates when they do not perform at my level. It's not a weakness. A real weakness. Why are they asking you a weakness? What are the 2 things that they want to get out of this? Right?
They want you to show that you're aware of your limitations, so you know when to turn to someone else.
Okay. That you are an introspective person. 1. Okay. So you are an introspective person. 2. Why they want to ask about your weakness because. Yeah, back then.
Like they want to know if you're doing something about it? Like
Okay.
are you working towards improvement?
Right, and that's part of your answer. The second reason is they want to know that you are an honest person. You might have 100 weaknesses, they're asking you this, they understand that you have a choice of saying what you want to, but can you be honest, and are you an introspective person to list your weaknesses? Strengths and weaknesses. I would say these 5 things I would almost write down on the computer, like write the answer down, practice them again and again. Because if I've done this sometimes in class where I might say, so what are your top 3 what are your top 3 strengths? And you might say, well, I like to work with people, I'm generally good with numbers, and yeah, I enjoy strategic problem solving. I'll go to someone else, ask them some questions, I'll come to you, and I'll say, what are your top 3 strengths? You say, okay, I enjoy working with people, I enjoy strategy and problem solving with it, and I feel I'm an analytical person. Then I'll go to someone else, come back to you and say, what are your top 3 strengths? You say, analytics, working with people, strategy. Here's an example 1, here's an example 2, here's example 3. My point is, why do you want to make your interview your practice? Do this 10 times. You know you'll get these questions with your career office, so that these things you know yourself code and you know these answers. Give me an example of a time when. Okay, it's one thing to say I'm a team player, I'm a good leader, but give me an example of a time when you led a group, when you worked with a team, when you faced an ethical dilemma, when you actually worked with a lot of numbers. Give me an example. Back up what you're saying. And the last question, what is the last question that typically you might hear in a consulting firm? Very end, what is the last thing that they will say? What's the last thing typically interviewers say as you're about to leave?
Do you have any questions?
Exactly. Do you have any questions for me? Okay, any questions for us? This can also be very tricky. My suggestion, or what I generally try to do, is not to ask something that's publicly available, the strategy of the company 5 years down the road. So, but if I know a little bit about the background of the interviewer, if they came from this background, from government, if they transitioned, something that I feel they should be able to answer themselves. Okay. This is just a suggestion. It's very much up to you what you want to ask, but keep in mind, you will be asked this. This is going to be the last interaction you're going to have with you. Fit questions. Any questions on this section? Okay. Let's move on to the case interview. Now, why do consulting firms use the case interview method? What is it supposed to do? Very importantly, it is a snapshot of a consulting environment. It is not the actual consulting environment where there's a lot of time between when decisions are made, you present, so forth. It is a snapshot of a consulting assignment, and it simulates, importantly, not just the problem solving, but the communication between the client and the consultant as they approach a problem. And in this snapshot, you have to give glimpses about so much of yourself. How you think about the problem, how you structure it, how you communicate. It's the typical format. The interviewer will provide a background of the problem. There will generally be more data. So you sort through some of the key issues and then ask for this data. Right? Do we have information in this area, so forth? You structure the problem. The interviewer's job is to also keep you on track, because any case can go on for hours. It can go in any directions. Keep in mind those cues where they want to bring you back to the aspect of the case that they want you to solve. It's a very important cue for you to keep in mind. Right? And you put together a logical approach to solving the problem, and you articulate it along the way. I recommend stating what are called mid-hypotheses. It's really wonderful when you go through a lot of data, you've gone through some analysis, and then my preliminary hypothesis at this point would be X. And you almost want to state this hypothesis as it would be an action title on your recommendation slide. Now, this can last anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes. Sometimes it goes on for longer than that. You can go through 40 minutes. And that time goes by quickly. I mean, I think a couple of people who've done one-on-one cases too. Sometimes you're just on a case in 50 minutes, hour can go by just diving through the case. Speed, importance of getting to the core issue early is also a criteria. Most people in the second and the final round will be able to go through a case and get the main points, right? But eventually someone's going to get to the core area, the core part, in 3 minutes. Someone's going to get there in 13 minutes. So when you do your 40th, 45th, 50th case, you work on things like relaxation and also speed in getting to the core of the issue. But you can do it. Everyone can do it with the effort. Okay, why case interview? Gives a snapshot reaction and gives insight into these skills. I'm listing all of them because it is important for you to look back and see if you checked off on all these things. They have to check off on these things, and you should too. By the way, I will give a copy of this, I will have a copy of this presentation PDF format. Christy will be circulated to all of you, so you don't need to take notes. But you're supposed to check off in all these areas: analytics, strategic thinking, quantitative analysis. Now, outside of doing cases one after the other, can you just work with a lot of numbers? You know, what's 10% of 7.4 billion? What's 15% of 18 million? I mean, everyone's good with math to a certain level, but can you exercise your mind to work with numbers and some techniques that will allow you to get at these calculations too quickly? One thing is knowing the framework, but someone who can get through these calculations faster also stands out. The middle case that we're going to go through today involves a lot of that. Okay? So we'll all exercise our minds, how much can we work with numbers to get at percentages, growth rates at the top of our heads. Also, I don't mean to scare you about this process. It's just at this point I'd rather lay out, the rigor in as much detail as possible, so you work as hard. If you put in the effort, I think there's a good chance that you'll find a good placement. But let's work hard. Let's not shirk on the work between now and your interviews. And also, there's this last point around curiosity and creativity. And keep this in mind as something that the interviewer has to check off in grade 2 on. How can you show your creativity and curiosity in solving a case? When we do in our public speaking class, we have 3 components that we look at that makes a good speech. Logos, pathos. Logos is the content, pathos is the emotional connect. And the third one is something called ethos, which is the credibility that you bring in as a speaker. Now, you generally think about your speech as something around, I got to say what I've got to say, and then I've got to connect. But how can I bring out my credibility? What can I say? When can I say it? And how can I say it? So that the people listening to me believe that I'm the right person to be talking to them on this. This is something, it's not the same as ethos here, but in doing all of this, how can I communicate to the interviewer that I am a creative and an intellectually curious person? If you go through all of this, it will be fun. Approach to cases, couple of steps. These are some steps that you will go through in every case. At the beginning, you want to clarify, ensure complete understanding of the issue. Listen closely. There's a lot of times, okay, someone's giving you the case, let me write this down. You may not miss anything, but listen, visualize. If someone says, okay, our client is a truck manufacturing company, transport yourself there. What does a truck manufacturing company look like? What will their plant look like? What are the raw materials? In manufacturing a truck, there's wheels, there's steel, there's this operations, a supply chain. Let me transport myself there. Let me listen to what the problem is. Ask questions to improve understanding. It's not a bad idea to say, well, so even if you're restating the facts, so the facts are A, B, and C. Okay. And I understand this is the problem. Right? And paraphrase if necessary. So that just shows that you can think about this in your own words. It's also always a good idea to say, can I take a minute, can I take a couple of minutes to gather my thoughts before you start answering? Okay. Here's the information, and I have a couple of minutes to gather my thoughts. Structure, develop an approach to solve the problem. This is probably the trickiest time of the case at the very beginning. How am I going to structure this whole thing? Is it a formula? Is it a framework that I'm going to go through? Am I going to list the steps, interim steps, medium steps? How am I going to structure this? How do I break the problem down into its discrete pieces? I need to state the hypothesis along the way and follow the frameworks that I feel will help you. Analyze. Walk the interviewer through your thinking, think aloud, whatever's going on in your mind, articulate it, walk the interviewer through this process, ask relevant questions, state the findings, and then conclude. This is very important too. So the recommendations that I would suggest are, the preliminary recommendations are A, B, and C. As a next step, D. State your hypothesis, discuss the trade-offs of this solution. What are some of the weaknesses of this solution? And relate back to the original problem statement. Okay? Approach to cases. Any questions? Yeah?
Are there
cases where the interviewer will challenge what you are actually saying?
Okay, the question is, will there be cases when you're challenged about your hypotheses, findings, and so forth? You know, I think most interviewers, if you just think about them, they're people like you and me just a few years down the line. And they recognize that you are in a lot of pressure and you're prepared to do this. So I don't think anyone's going to play a bad cop too often just for the sake of it. But if they are questioning something, it's generally a clue that they want you to try another approach. If you're asking, will they just ask you questions just to see if they can rile you? It's not something that's recommended. You never know. It's a big industry. McKinsey has 10,000 consultants. There's a lot of diversity too, but for the most part, it's a very congenial environment. So remember these 4 things: clarify, structure, analyze, and conclude. Think about whether you have gone through these 4 components in your case study. Just gotta give them all these ones. Yeah,
Just a
that.
quick question. For example, you're applying for a job in San Francisco, so you must have prepared some information relevant to this market, right? Should you recommend to kind of study some data on population or anything
Yes.
before?
So one of my last slides, I will give you a set of things that you should just know. Okay. Things like population, number of households, average per capita income. So there's only about a dozen or so things. And again, if you're interviewing with the San Francisco office, I wouldn't say necessarily research San Francisco for stats and so forth, or demographic information. But I think overall about the country, even things like world population and so forth, those are things that you should just have some idea about. That's part of being an intellectually curious person. But I will lay out some of those facts that you can just have. Okay, generally you can categorize cases into 6 categories here. Okay. You could argue that there's a few more, but these are the categories that you typically go through. One, the most common one, tends to be a profitability case. Consulting firms generally in the for-profit sector want to improve profits. Market sizing is very popular because in a short amount of time, it checks your analytical skills, your ability to think on the spot, and to market size, basically. Industry analysis, investment. Should we invest in this venture? Some element of time value of money for finance, a lot of business intuition, operations improvement, and then this whole category of brain teasers or oddballs. Now let's go through our first, well, this is not a case, but let me just talk about probably the most common framework. A profitability case, right? What are profits? What is the formula for profits? Profits are revenues or sales minus costs. Can be a bunch. You can have some questions. These are just different ways of wording a typical profitability question. Okay. What might be causing the profits to decline? How would you investigate this issue? Profit, revenues minus costs. Even something as simple as this at the beginning. Revenue component, cost component shows your structured thinking. Revenues. Let's break it down one level more. What is the definition of revenues? What is the formula? Okay. Price of a good or service times quantity. It's revenues. P times Q. Now costs typically in a business environment can be broken up into fixed costs and variable costs. That's the next level. It means price is quantity, fixed cost, variable. What does this framework allow you to do? It allows you to actually probe one area, right, in a more isolated manner than the interviewer wants to take you. There might be an issue with the cost when you lay it out. They've got it that you understand basic profitability, and they might go to you, let's look into the cost, let's look into the pricing over the past few years. Take it one more level. On the revenue side, there are a few frameworks, and I'll introduce them, but product, price, placement, promotion, 4 Cs, costs, competitors, collaborators, and company. 5 forces you can look at on the whole revenues. How do we increase the revenue side? On the fixed and the variable costs, now what are fixed costs? What is the definition of a fixed cost? Why is it called a fixed cost? What is your name?
It's a
TJ,
TJ?
the cost that you have regardless of how much you produce?
Right. So typically things like rent and electricity, they don't really change by when you sell more apples, you sell an additional good, right? They're kind of fixed. Your electricity will remain fixed. Okay? Overhead, so if you have salespeople, marketing people, that will remain fixed. So then what is a variable, what's an example of a variable cost? Florence?
Example
Of a variable cost? How about raw material? The material that you will put into manufacturing the good that is associated with that good can be a variable cost. There's also sometimes labor, can be direct labor. So if you need so many minutes, so many hours of making an electronic component, and if you can allocate that cost to it, that will also be a variable cost. So laying it out this way, like fixed cost traditionally has fixed labor, fixed overhead, like rent and electricity, property, plant, and equipment, and sales, general, and administrative costs. Now I know this is getting a little bit into accounting, but this level, if you want to work in a consulting firm, is something that you should brush upon. Selling, general, and administrative expense. This lingo is required. And then on the variable side, there's variable labor, overhead, materials, and you want to keep in mind this issue of economies of scale and scope. So the fact that the costs may actually come down if production goes up and you have economies of scale. Some of it, combination of simple economics and accounting. But if you are not yet familiar, just try and familiarize yourself with at least these terms. What is your name?
Fahad.
Fahad, yeah.
Scale and scope are like, we understand the concept, but isn't that very difficult to put it in a practical application? Whether, how would we know that a company or organization has scale or scope?
Yeah. Yeah, so Fahad, again, this is not very literal. The point is, as you're going through the depths of a case, when you say that here are the variable costs, you list it down, just having that insight that, look, over time, if we increase our production, if we get a bigger production line, keep in mind that these costs might come down. So just the fact that you have that intuition of the concept of economies of scale is important to communicate to the interviewer. Remember, the interviewer is seeing you for the first time, they don't know what you know and what you don't know. I'm also saying don't throw this out, at the beginning, keep this in your arsenal. Basic profitability framework, any questions? Okay. Now, here are some frameworks. Okay, I would suggest just go to Wikipedia, Porter's 5 Forces, Wikipedia, 4 P's of marketing, SWOT analysis, 7S, BCG matrix. Good 5 frameworks here. Okay. The 5 forces are typically used for industry analysis. Should our client, they make clothing, should they enter into the plastic space? There you want to see, what is the bargaining power? Suppliers, the threat of substitutes, buyers, new entrants, and what is the competition? Again, I won't go into the in-depth of each of these frameworks. We don't have the scope and the time for that. But I would suggest do just a quick Wikipedia reading. Wikipedia is one of the best tools I didn't have when I was going through this. It lays out a lot of different things in a very concise manner. It's user-generated, so things improve over time. BCG matrix is around, again, this very interesting, perhaps the most classic framework that came out of consulting, came out in the 1970s by the founder of BCG, around what should a client do with the set of its portfolio companies. And there are 2 dimensions here around relative market share and market growth rate, and there was this famous term of cash cow, dog stars, and question marks in terms of what each of your business lines fit in. McKinsey 7S framework is kind of an organizational assessment as to how things are working within your organization. Again, go through these 5, just spend about 20 minutes on each so that you're familiar. Market sizing. This tends to be a very popular case. It can be thrown in along with a fit interview, so it can be short, they can quickly test your basic thinking. It can be a full case by itself. How many gas stations are there in the US? How many massages were given in the Midwest per year? Is the dollar value of the Bluetooth headset market? How many individuals played tennis on the tennis courts at Fletcher in the past year? How many car tires are there in the US? Why is the manhole cover round? Oh, that's a brain teaser. So let's do this now. Here is your first case. how many car tires are there in the US? By the way, were there any attendees from last year who are back this year? Okay, thank you. Did not give the answers of it. Thank you.
I don't remember that.
Okay. Did you forget it to the last decimal? How many car tires are there in the US? This might be a question if you're directly asked by your interviewer. Let's get some suggestions. Let's get some participation. How do you think about it? Volunteers, Florence, back there? You raise one?
I would consider how many types of cars are there in the US.
Let's do this now. What I say again in the art of communication class, every time you speak, you ask a question in class. Imagine that there's a TV camera on you, right? And you're asking your question on television as if it's going to be seen by millions of people. Okay? Now in the same way, let's do this. Like your interviewer has asked you this question: how many car tires are there in the US? What are the first lines of what you will start responding to him with? Florence,
How many, I would ask.
a little louder, please.
I would ask how many households have cars in the US?
Okay. Okay. Good. So I guess your question is how many? There's two parts. Is how many households are there in the U.S. Okay, and you choose that framework to start with, right? And then I guess you said cars. How many cars? So then there's an element of matching households with cars. Okay.
I have a question. Are you just asking me how many cars are there in the US, or is there background information given?
See, something like this case, which is a market sizing, they want you to see what you would do with the question. This is not a typical case. Our client is a paper manufacturing company. This is their cost for the sheeting. Here's the cost in packaging. This is just, you want to see how you think about things. A lot of data, it's out there. People know about cars, the population and so forth. You said something about households. What is your name?
Jeremy,
Jeremy, yeah. What are your first few response lines?
how many four-wheeled vehicles are in the United States? And of those, how many have an extra tire?
Okay. Now, you're not asking, good, you're not asking that question. You should say, well, okay, well, I would start with trying to assess.
Okay, right,
Yeah, how many vehicles are there in the US? Is that what you said?
yeah. Four-wheeled.
Now, is it better to start with households or vehicles, and why? What's the perspective on that? At the back in the green, sir, what's your name?
David,
David.
I think the question is functioning tires or just tires in general?
Aha, good question, right? This is how you want to think. Okay, the question is, this is the specific question that's given to you. How many car tires are there in the US? Are there in the US? Beautiful point. Are those the tires that are on cars, right? Or tires anywhere? Even higher level of laying out the problem. Okay. You had a question? What's your name?
Aisha.
Aisha, yeah.
I just wanted to talk about how I would probably approach the
great.
problem. So I would start with the assumption what's the population, what's the average household size. So that gives you the number of households, and from the number of households you draw an arbitrary assumption about the number of cars per household.
Excellent, yeah.
And from that you assume that every car will have 4 wheels. So you multiply that with 4. And that's an estimate.
Okay.
And I have
Couple of
one
Okay.
question regarding that as well. When you answer, is that if I get the framework right, but I made one of the assumptions grossly wrong, for instance, the population assumption or the number of members in the household,
Okay.
how would that
Couple of points to your statements. First thing is, in terms of phrasing your response, something like population and households, don't ask the interviewer. You should know the population of the US and the households. Population of the US is about 350 million, you can round up. And the number of households in the US are 120 million. It's much stronger when you say, okay, well, I would try to think about tires on cars, not on cars. In terms of the tires on cars, I would use the number of households in the US, which is 120 million. Multiply it, lay out your formula. Multiply it by the number of cars per household, which I would assume to be, fill in the blank. What is that number? Number of cars per household. How many individuals per household in the US if there are 120 million households and about 340? About 3, something between 2.5 and 3. Okay? Given that there's 3 members, might be a husband, wife, child, but it could be someone, grandparents, so forth. How many cars per household privately owned?
2.
1.5.
Okay. Big difference, 2 versus 1. Okay. You have to put your money on Jeremy, you were saying what number?
I would say 1.5.
Okay. Now, it's okay to state something, your hypothesis, given that you're thinking about it, thinking aloud like this. The answer is actually 1. Okay? And that the interviewer can tell you. Now, that's a statistic that you may or may not know. It's fine to say, I would assume there's about 3 members of the household. Usually, I would think about, a husband and wife having a car each. But then if you take a look at different economic strata, so forth, it's not the case that everyone has to. The answer is 1. Okay? Now, you were asking about if something, this is an example, right? If you had said 2.5 cars per household. But the fact that you're thinking your logic aloud and that you got a fact in that logic wrong is okay. If you say something like 4 cars per household, then clearly this is a red flag. But saying 1.5, 2.5 is okay, even up to 2.5. Then, Aisha, right? Yeah. The third statement you made, Aisha, was 4 tires per car. Everything go back and examine it. 4 tires per car, very intuitive. Again, this is not about two-wheelers, it's asking you about car tires. 4 tires per car, how confident are you? Why is that, Alejandra?
Well, there's a spare tire on the car.
How many car tires are there in the US? Okay, I'm going to look at tires on a car just associated with private cars. But there is a spare tire generally in almost every vehicle. Not 4, 5, right?
There are all kinds of other rental vehicles and all kinds of other supplies.
How would you classify this difference? What would you call the two categories?
Privately owned, commercially owned.
Yes. Private, commercial. Now keep in mind, can you get to another level of refinement? Commercial versus government. You'd be surprised at the number of cars owned by national, state, and federal governments. Okay. Simple thing, sounds like how many cars, 4 tires per car, so many households, boom, boom, wait. Levels of complexity. Say please.
Miranda. I would also look at tires currently in use versus tires currently in inventory.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, those in use. But let's define this more. In cars, right? Not on cars. In use, in dumps, in alternative uses. You'd be surprised at the number of tires that are used for different purposes after they no longer serve. Okay, Fahad, yeah.
In stores too.
Yeah, in stores, right? At retailers.
At retail.
Okay, let's lay this out. Now, you have so many different complications. One more, yeah.
I had only cars? What
Yeah,
about
car tires? The number of car tires.
How do you define car in this scenario?
So that's fine. You can ask, but at some point you want to also not be difficult.
Yeah. Well, sure.
But how do you define the car? Sure. What is a car? And they might say, okay, not a truck,
Yeah.
right? Because that's a large. It's maybe a 4-wheel normal size vehicle. So yeah, that's fine. How many cars? Now, using all this information, how would you lay out that your sheet of paper? What kind of arrows, how would you break it at the first level of abstraction? How many car tires in the US? What's the highest level of tree branch that you'd lay out? Fahad, you're confident with this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah?
Residential and commercial, first of all,
Okay.
2 categories.
Actually, that comes 1 or 2 more levels down. Yeah? Name? Atul, yeah?
Used and not used.
Used and not used. Any other variation to this?
Can you just do a matrix?
A matrix?
Yeah,
What's a
but-
matrix?
Like just, you have residential, commercial, residential, commercial, governmental, one side, and you have columns of like
So,
use,
okay.
non-use.
You want to do like a 2 or 3, 3 by 3, whatever, and then
Yeah,
populate.
and then just
But, okay, through a matrix, you may not come from the highest level of abstraction, and I'll show you, okay?
There's a-
One last, then I'll move on.
I'm
One
sorry,
last.
I just can't wrap my head around that, I'm a lawyer, so, in the US during a determinate time, because there are many cars coming into the US from both borders.
Oh, sure, you can live that. This is in the US presently, okay, currently, right now, and it's a static time period, right, as of today.
So for me, the first line would be on cars and not on cars.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. How many cars are there in the US? Let's talk about the tires on cars, not on cars. Okay. Next level, let's look at the, sorry, the formatting went off, but let's look at the ones on cars. Private, unsold, public. Private, this thing which most, I'd say 80% of students, if you ask them this question, they will try to hone in on this. 20% is still a large number for consulting firms to work with. You need to get to some level below this. 120 million households times 1 car per household times the number of tires. A trick question here, not 4 or 5. Can you transport yourself in that situation? Think about a car, think about the number of tires. Can, in that pressure of the interview, can you still think that, well, you know, there's a 5th tire? Because this makes 20% difference to the answer. 6, and calculating this, 120 million times 5 times 1, layout your calculation is 600 million. On your sheet of paper, you need to have this number, perhaps circle it, given that this is going to count towards the total coming up. Unsold, now you may not know what that number is. Interviewer will tell you, well, let's assume 10% is unsold. 10% of what number? 600 million, which is 60 million. This is still, as Fahad said, lying in the stores waiting for people to buy them. Recycling going on perhaps, they're just there in shops. 10%, 60 million. Public. Okay, someone said commercial. Can you say, what is the opposite of private? Opposite of private is public. Okay? What is public involved? Commercial, government. What are the commercial branches? Taxis, limos, fleets. And you know, if you had the time, you could try and estimate. You could say, well, I would guess this so many times. They say, wait, you know, I get it that you get this point. Let me give you the number. What do you think is that number? If you didn't know this amount, 50 million. And you might have guessed, well, number of taxis, say 30 million, 20 million, 5 million. That's okay, but you counted taxis. Say 50 million. Government, 60 million. Oh, sorry, 100 million actually. 100 million owned by the government. Now, this is something you may not necessarily know. If you have that 600 million number here, you're adding up all these numbers. What's the bottom part of this framework? Not on cars. How would you break that? Well, total number of tires. We talked about this. Thank you.
Matthews.
Matthews.
Yes. Being as used or new.
Beautiful. New, at manufacturer in shops. These are just unsold lying in inventory. Right? Manufacturer in shops. Used, in dumps, alternatives. Look at this number. 500 million. 1 second. Now, as you are going through the sheet, one is getting the intuition, but can you lay out a sheet like this in one page that gets to the numbers one below the other? It's a big ask. I mean, even with all these years of experience, you can't lay something out and say this is a benchmark also. But can you do this? Can you come something close? If you don't have a sheet as neatly planned as this, can you at least circle the sub numbers? You know, so you know, add 600 million to 100 million to 50 million to 60 million. And these things won't come to you unless you find this optimal relaxation. The thought is, you have a whole lifetime of learning in this area. It's all up here. The worst you can do is bring you down from your potential on the day of the interview by being nervous, by being, if you're relaxed, much of this will flow out of your mind. Question back there?
Yeah, still a basic question. I mean, I find the assumption that every household in the US would have a car a very uneasy assumption. I mean, in the sense that shouldn't you be trying to probably demarcate in terms of maybe GDP or maybe purchasing power or something? To just assume that, you know, there are 120 households and each one of them has a certain number of cars.
Yeah, so I think to that, at some point you want to keep some constraints rough and fixed. I mean, I guess if this was the whole analysis, is, you know, what are the different segments of the US population? How much is the highest socioeconomic class and how many cars is the middle? That's a whole different area of assumption, and sometimes you have to have the judgment of what to keep fairly, you know, simple and abstract, and then use that number to get to the bottom line quickly. Because if you go into this analysis, you know, you're going to spend a lot of time before coming to the crux of the case. And this is not saying that every household has one car, but there's an average of 1 or 1.1, 1.2 cars per household.
But would the interviewer be comfortable with me making this assumption on my own, or should I be sort of probing him for this?
No, I mean, usually if they have a case that they want to apply and give you for something that will determine your job or your next round, generally they have enough information, whether it's from the client or if it's a case like this from national statistics, that they will be able to give you a rough answer. Okay, very rarely will they throw something out and then they're guessing with you. Okay, so, yeah.
So what they really want is not us telling them the actual number. They want to see how we calculate the kind of the pattern of thought.
Yeah. If you got like 50% of all of this, it's a very good answer. Okay. If your number was, you know, if it was like 450 million, that's below even this number, then it's not a good answer. But if it was something like 700, 800 million, it's okay. It's not 1.4 billion, but your logic is not there. It's really a lot more than the final answer. Okay, one last question on this case, we'll move on. Yeah.
Just a logistical question. You mentioned that this could also be a fit question.
No.
No, it couldn't? Okay.
John, the fit questions are the ones that, fit means, okay, a fit question is, are you a personality fit for the organization?
Okay.
Are you, what is your, you know, it's your background, your personality fit as part of this. Case is meant to check your intellectual abilities and the ability to problem solve in real time.
Okay, so the time frame for this, in your estimation, what would be the typical time frame you'd be doing this under?
Typical question.
This question in particular.
Yeah. Alan, you had something?
We're just kind of discussing where you would get these numbers
Like
for.
50, 150, I mean,
It's just plain assumption, right? You just, the main thing is just to consider it, to have it on.
Well, let's just listen to the question and then we'll, because yeah, otherwise we're not able to hear this. But on their question around how much time, a question like this typically shouldn't take any more than 15 to 20 minutes. You can get to, because here's a lot of basic assumption, you could ideally get to it in about 10 minutes. Sometimes faster, but if you really want to go through every component, it should take between 10 and 15 minutes. To your question about some of the numbers over here, we can also follow up, we can, you know, talk right after class. And again, this is, I mean, I'm not sure how accurate this is in reality anyways, but the basic logic is well covered here.
When you are in the interview, is it expected to give some answer or just go through with your logic, step by step, or what should you do?
Definitely both. As a question like how many tires, right? How many requires some answers that are numbers. And it's not a subjective, I would do this. So you want to find a blend of laying out your logic, but then also giving specific numbers at the different points. Now, if that number here was, you know, was 10 million, they will correct you and give you 60, but then correct that number when you get to the bottom line. So that was the market estimation case. I do have another case that's a bit more global. It's, you know, I kind of developed it with some of the data last year. And it's also meant, you may or may not have had deep business background, but it's also a case around things like world population, internet penetration, Facebook usage. Things that should be very universal to people, also something relevant to Fletcher. And I'll go through this a bit.